What's the most common failure point of a church revitalization process? We'll let you know next on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu. A.J., glad to have you back this week on the podcast. Last week, I was interviewing Adam Ehrlichman, one of our certified guides, and the founder of Build Groups. And that was a great conversation. So if you haven't had a chance to go and listen to that, please go back to episode 232. And give that a listen. And speaking of certified guides, AJ, we have our next guide certification is happening April 8th through the 10th. Many of you have filled out a phase 1 guide application, and lots of you have kind of passed through that. I just want to remind you, if you're listening to this and that's you, you've got to complete the phase 2 application like right away.
Our deadline is going to be March 22nd. You're hearing this episode likely on perhaps around March 20th. You might be listening to this episode after the due date. If you missed it, email us, leadership@malfersgroup.com. We'll see if it's possible or not to do that. But yeah, as you hear this, there's only a couple of days left.
Right. Get that into us. Okay, so today we're talking about where is the most common point in the revitalization process where things kind of break down and stop working. So, AJ, take it away, my friend. I'm going to let you try this conversation.
Yeah. So people, you might be able, this is not rocket science. I said that a lot. We were in Spain last week and I kept saying, this is not rocket science. This also is not rocket science. It will not be a surprise, Scott, for anybody listening, that making plans is not the hard part. It's following through on plans that is the hard part. And even one step beyond that, following through means you've actually devised a series of steps that you're going to take. So we're talking about implementation this week, Scott, because this is where we see churches fall off. This is where the problems begin to creep in. It's as long as it takes to make a decision on the front end, like, okay, I think we're maybe not in good shape anymore. We should talk about that. And then the decision comes to, right, we agree we're not in good shape. We should do something about that. And then the process begins of what should we do about that? And then maybe we are going to do our own revitalization, or maybe we're going to bring in an expert, and then plans are made about that and assessments are done. There's a lot of things that happen, and it feels like progress is being made before you actually ever get to the beginning of the change process, because no revitalization happens without change. Doing the same thing that you've always done is not revitalization. That's status quo. And so the actual change process happens when you say, here's something that needs to change, and here's the steps we're going to take to change it. That's where churches stop functioning. And it's a shame, because a lot of effort, as I just described, went in to get to that point, and a desire to change. But without the follow through, a lot of time is wasted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that making plans is easy. Moving forward with your plans is more difficult. However, it's less difficult than you might think. I think that churches tend to overcomplicate this process in the sense that they assume that there's some magic formula for implementation. And we do have some very specific instructions, and I'm sure we're going to talk about those things here in a minute. But I think that people overthink it. They're like, how should we go about this? And so there's just this paralysis that happens around implementation, because they assume that it's got to be done in I've been having a back and forth dialogue with one church I've been working with, and they're asking some good questions, but they're going, well, what about this? What about this factor? And what about this factor? And what about this factor? And I keep just saying, just start moving forward. If you can start to move forward, that's like half the battle. But paralysis around analysis paralysis around the implementation is gonna kill you. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I guess I just want to start with that and just say planning is easy and a little bit fun. Execution is hard, but it's not as hard as you're making it.
Yeah, that's right. It can be overcomplicated. We're kind of just evolving here into our first point, and that is that actually making plans to change have to be done. Making plans is different than making plans to change. So that's where we're kicking this off. And around making plans to change, I think it's helpful whenever we limit the scope of the changes that we're going to make to some key areas in the church. In our process, we create an alignment between our discipleship pathway and the strategies or the change plans that will be made. So you can think of this maybe even just in 4 kind of categorical areas of the church. What might we need to change or improve in like our Sunday morning experience, our worship service, or how we handle guests, things around that nature? That's a good one and a common one. Number 2, what might we need to change around our primary discipleship ministries in our church? Are our small groups functioning well? Are our Sunday schools effective? Or is our system of classes that we do getting us where we need to be? Or do we need to change some of that? Do we need to improve our process for getting people employed into volunteer service in the church and working in their gifts? And then what changes do we need to make in our outreach efforts, getting outside of the church locally and globally? So I think if we maybe put things into these buckets, it can help sort out what might just feel like this infinite unknowing thing of change. Like, what should we do? Focusing in on these key areas can really be helpful in narrowing the conversation and the strategies.
I think one just I know you 100% agree with me, but just for a point of clarification for our listeners, one thing that we focus on as we look at those key areas that you're talking about is not just how can we make them maybe more popular or better attended, but how can we leverage these in such a way that we're getting more life transformation out of them?
Yeah, sure,
Uh,
right.
and so it's not, I mean, obviously we would love for you to have more participation, but you can have something that's really well attended. We see this all the time in churches we work with. Something that's very popular and well attended, but when you look at sort of the transformational fruit from it, you're going, I'm not seeing that. So there needs to be some change here. So just be sure you're focused on the right thing, not just boosting. I know it's kind of in vogue to say we want to boost engagement. Like I don't
Mm,
want to boost engagement. I want to boost transformation.
yeah.
Um, so you may need more engagement also, but if someone if someone's willing to volunteer, an hour or two a week or a few hours a month or something like that, but they never capture the picture of what it means to be um, building up the body of Christ and understanding my call into
Mm.
ministry and the deeper things, the transformational things about that, then that's not a win just because I got them to volunteer. So just be sure that as you're making those plans, you're planning the right way around transformation and not just around participation.
Yeah, that's right. We can't lose sight of the fact that there's a mission that we're operating on. There's a stadium, an arena in which all of this is taking place, and that is to make and mature disciples of Jesus, the Great Commission. So any of our functions and strategies in the church all have to be focused on: are we introducing people to the gospel? Are people coming to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior? And then are we teaching them to obey everything that he commanded?
Yeah.
So there's a playing field by which all of this work is happening. And if we're outside of that, then all plans are for naught. So,
Yep.
yep, great point. The second thing is actually planning the change work. So to differentiate what we just talked about, once we've defined our scope and maybe the areas in which change needs to happen, there has to be a step 1 and a step 2 and a step 3. We have to know what the end goal is, and then develop a series of actions that are going to happen to get to that end. This is project management, if you want to think of it that way. I mean, not necessarily different from what any other organization or business might do. Not that that changes anything in the church. If we know we have a goal and we say, well, okay, well, this needs to get done. We need to get this done. Who is going to do it? When is it due? What should the results look like? These are okay questions to ask in the church, and to make that kind of a plan. And that is going to be necessary if you want to achieve certain outcomes by a certain time. If you don't care about the outcomes or when it gets done, planning is not for you. That is just like, let's just kind of see how things go. But again, that's not what this episode is about. This is about actually getting things done, if you are serious about church revitalization. So we have to plan the steps, the people that will do them, what is to be expected, and when is it going to be completed.
I think this is where that analysis paralysis can come into play. So if you're working with us in strategic envisioning and we're looking at where we want to be 5 years from now, if you have in your brain, and again, I have some churches that think this way, I need to have developed every sort of action step between here and 5 years from now. If that's what you're thinking, you're not thinking rightly. You certainly want to have an end state in mind. That's why we do the whole thing in the first place. Certainly 5 years from now, what would you like the church to look like? And then within a 1 year time frame, we want to go, okay, here's what we'd like to see a year from now. And there's going to be a little bit more detail there, a little bit clearer of a picture. AJ, I was on a train recently in the last few days, and when you're sitting on that train, when I was sitting on that train, I could see off in the distance, I could see some mountains, and I could see there were some mountain towns and some things like that were coming up, but they weren't particularly clear. It was a beautiful view, but it wasn't particularly clear. But a little bit closer to me was a town that had a train station coming up, and that was much clearer to me. I'm like, okay, we're coming up on this train station. We're going to be stopping there and picking up some more passengers and so on. It's a little bit like that, where you go, okay, you're 5 years from now. I can see off in the distance where we're going, and it's a beautiful view, but I can't see it in particular. But I've got a train station coming up this year that's on the track. It's on the way. And so I think that this is the mistake. Even within the 1 year time frame, we think we have to have every action step planned out for the whole year, and you don't, because you probably don't have enough information on day one to get you all the way there. So just think in a 90-day sprint, what do I need to do in the next 90 days that's going to bring me closer to the goal that I have for this year? And if you can get that much planned out, then just start working on that. And don't worry about having every detail worked out, because that's where I think that this is a common failure point, where, again, they're just overanalyzing. I got to know every step between here and there. No, you don't. You just need to know, what are the things I need to do in the next 3 months. And that's usually enough information. And then you can start acting on that.
Yeah, that's right. Milestones are your friend. Have some milestones, some waypoints along the way. Work towards those, and then continue in that momentum, which is part of point number 3, and that is continuing the work. Another high point of failure in the church is that maybe it starts off okay, but then they begin to get lax on accountability and meeting deadlines. In our process, we highly encourage regular monthly meetings of the teams that are working through this process, so that they have some deadlines built in. They've got some accountability. They've got support for one another as they are doing this work. They've got clear channels of communication by which to collaborate and to help with one another's efforts. So continuing to meet is, if we probably had to boil this down to one thing, Scott, it would just be that. You want to be successful in implementation, keep meeting. Even if you're failing, keep meeting, because you can work past that. And so, this is one of the most important pieces.
I tell churches all the time that churches have a bad habit And then part of this is human nature, but we overestimate the value of what can happen in sort of one strategic planning weekend and underestimate what can happen over a year of implementation meetings. You way overvalue. I far be it from me to say don't bring us in. I think that you have to do the work that we do in that one weekend to start the whole process. So there is a lot of value, but I think some churches think everything we need we're going to get in this one moment, and it's like not that's not true. Everything you need you're not going to get in that one moment, in that one weekend of planning, or even if we did a kind of an extended process where we're doing maybe 2 or 3 meetings, you're not going to get everything. You need the year of implementation. And so churches underestimate the value of that consistency every month, 90-minute meetings, the way that we kind of outline them for churches to do. And the churches that are faithful to do that, you're right, they don't even recognize themselves a year later. They go, wow, we've come so far. So don't fall victim to that.
Yeah.
Don't overestimate what you can get done in a weekend and underestimate what you can get done in a year.
Yeah. Yep. Our fourth point is working through pushback. You're inevitably going to have pockets that are going to be uncomfortable, maybe with things that are happening. And this is just something that you have to plan for on the front end. But you get a couple months in, a few things have changed, and all of a sudden people are like, I'm not sure I like this. You've upset something that I'm very used to. And this is something that just has to be worked through. This takes, a bit of fortitude as leaders to continue to meet with people, even outside of maybe teams that are doing some work. Keep the communication clear. Remind people of the mission and vision by which you decided to make these changes to begin with. What the better tomorrow looks like. That's the best way, I think, to smoothen out these things. But it's also important to keep a clear picture of how significant is this pushback, because sometimes a few vocal people can blow it up in your mind into feeling like it's all coming down. There's a huge quantity. A majority of people don't like this, when in fact it might just be a handful of people. And this was a question I got asked several times, Scott, last week. When we were in Spain doing training, this type of question, it's a fear that a lot of leaders have. If I begin to make changes, what happens when people disagree with things? And there's not always a perfect outcome from that either. So I think we have to know that going in, that we can do our best to bring everybody along with us, but it's possible that there will be casualties of relationship going forward as well. That's unfortunately, the nature. It's the nature of dealing with humans, and it's the nature of being in a leadership position that is trying to move as many people as possible to a really great future.
Totally. I mean, I think depending on your temperament, this is more or less of a problem. So if you are an S on the disc, and if you're like, I don't know what I am, go back to we have a whole series. You can just look it up on our website. Just type in disc, DISC, and it should pop up. But if you're an S type leader, then even one voice that's negative, you're going to hear it really loudly, and it's going to cause you to want to not move forward. But it's really important with people, if you hear, or sometimes as a leader, one of my least favorite things is that when I hear leaders say, well, people are saying XYZ thing. Like, who is saying that? Oh, I don't want to break a confidence. Okay, then fine. Don't tell me their name, but how many people are we talking about? We're talking about one person. We're talking about. So I ignore personally. People are saying if I'm not going to get at least a number of people, if not a flat out name of a person, because that's a reason why these things fail. Is someone gets a little uncomfortable, and you kind of gotta toughen up. There's a difference, though, AJ. I think it's worth noting here. There's a difference between um, pushback that's just change resistance and pushback that might be valid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you're a D type leader or an I type leader, D's in particular, don't ignore the criticism. Listen to it first and make sure that there isn't something valid there that you've missed. Um, and sometimes you have to make an adjustment and go, okay, we'll do it this way instead. I would also say, sorry, last thing I want to say on this is, we tell leaders all the time. This is an analogy that maybe only works well in the U.S., but this 6 yards of progress picture where I don't have to get a touchdown on every play. On every year, I don't have to be throwing the ball 80 yards down the field. And using an American football analogy, I just need to get 6 yards. And so sometimes you may need to just readjust. A good change management tactics would be, let's not throw the ball 80 yards. Like, let's just go for 6 yards and make incremental progress. And you're likely to get less pushback. So again, if you're a D type leader or an I type leader, you might be going, I've got to go all the way. And maybe you don't. Maybe you can just go for incremental change, because incremental change over a long period of time gets you in the same direction and you get less resistance.
Yeah.
Push where there's mush, as they like to say.
Yep. Good advice. Yeah. The temperament, that's a great point to consider. Knowing yourself of how your temperament reacts to that pushback, understanding perhaps the temperament of others also.
I have another analogy.
Oh, good. A non-football analogy, Scott?
A non-football analogy, but
Okay.
It'll be even more niche.
A non-American football analogy?
Non-American football analogy, but it'll be even more niche. So
okay.
even fewer people will appreciate it.
Perfect.
Great. How many of you listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube have seen the Dune movies or read the books?
Yeah. That was a waste of a couple hours.
They have those shields, they press the person is like, they have those shields. The way that those shields work is that if you come at the shield, like, because you watch the movies, why are they using swords? Like, this is a sci-fi movie. Why are they using swords? It's because those shields are designed that if something comes at you really quickly at a high velocity, like a bullet, it can deflect that. Or even if you were to kind of poke really fast with a sword, it would deflect that. The only way to get through that shield is to go slowly or to slice. Like, that's the only way in which you can kind of get through that shield.
Okay.
Which is a good analogy maybe for change management, is that when you go really hard and fast, you're going to encounter a lot of resistance. If you just if you move forward consistently and slowly, you're going to break through that shield. How's that for a really niche?
Wow. That was quite the thing.
How often have we included a sci-fi analogy? Or one might just say, I'm just with the times because that movie is out in theaters.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that remake from 40 years ago, you're with it. That's good.
So whether you like American football or sci-fi, I have just given you really good analogies either way.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Please include those in the article, AJ.
For the other majority of people listening, maybe we'll think of something else to tell you, because, Scott, people are saying they don't like these analogies.
This is why people love this podcast, AJ. It's for my wonderful metaphors and analogies.
I can tell you how many people don't like your analogies, but they're talking. That's all. Okay.
Okay, moving forward.
Our last point is on having outside support. So, of course, the Church Revitalization Podcast from the Malphurs Group and Healthy Churches Global. We love to talk about this stuff, and we love to help you with it. So, but having a guide alongside you, especially again, in light of your comment about personality types, Scott. If it feels like the implementation piece might be a challenge for you, you're not good at making plans, you're not good at receiving maybe negative feedback, having somebody alongside you to help talk through this and be able to keep going can be a game changer for your team. So, and when we deal with churches like this, frequently, Scott. I mean, I've got one right now that it's a challenge even to figure out who's going to lead the work primarily, and it's causing delay in even getting implementation started. So there's just all kinds of pitfalls that you may encounter in your church, depending on the makeup of your team and the culture of your church, your own temperament and personality. But having outside support can be a tool that can help you make plans well, execute well, and get the outcomes that you'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, you said all the things. I do think it matters. I do think that it really helps, and I do think that um, my experience has been that when we work with churches, um, pastors and church leaders just feel a little bit of boost of confidence knowing that they have someone who's been there before to kind of validate whether or not something is this new, is this normal, should I be concerned? You know, we all need that. I think we all need a person to actually, on kind of a non-related church thing. I was walking through some some stuff in my own life with AJ just earlier today, and AJ was like, "Yeah, that what you're talking about is totally normal, and you should not be freaking out." And just to hear that, like to have people in your life who are outside of a situation who can say, "Yeah, I think what you're experiencing is really normal,"
Yeah.
can bring a lot of comfort because when it's the first time you've experienced it, so it feels abnormal to you. But when you can work with someone who has seen it a thing or two, that can bring a lot of just self-confidence to go, okay, we're going to make it through this situation.
You can do it. You can make it. Okay, we're going to pull this one to an end here for episode 233 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. So you can go to malfordgroup.com/233, read today's show notes. The audio is there if you're, for some reason, watching this on YouTube and want to hear it. The YouTube link is there if the opposite is the case. Another quick plug, we've got some really important mission projects coming up that we need your support for. We have a church in Munich, Germany, coming up in April that we need to be on site for to help. And then in May in Thailand as well. And so go to malfordgroup.com/donate. You can read more about our international mission projects there. And we would love to have you as an individual or your church consider partnering with us to make this work possible because we travel all over the world supporting churches and leadership teams. And we need your support to do that, to cover those expenses. Thanks for being with us, everybody. We love you. We'll see you next time.